And that is how a storm, a broken past, and an unexpected encounter brought a lost family back to life. A widower who thought his heart was finished. An Apache woman who had nowhere left to go. And two little girls who finally found the warmth they had been crying for. Some stories remind us that love doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it comes through hardship, danger, and impossible choices. But when it finally settles, it heals everything it touches. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a comment below. Your support brings more stories like this to life. Until then, stay safe, stay hopeful. And remember, miracles often begin in the darkest moments. The storm had barely settled when the lonely cowboy stepped out onto his porch, boots sinking into the wet earth. Samuel Hart was a man carved from silence and sorrow, his eyes carrying the weight of 8 months without his wife. The ranch behind him, once full of warmth, now felt cold, unfinished, a place trying to hold itself together. His daughters clung to him like frightened birds whenever thunder rolled. He was a father doing everything, yet losing grip on everything. And tonight, as the wind dragged through the fields, he sensed something unusual hiding in that storm-soaked darkness. A faint cry reached him, a sound too soft to belong to an animal, too human to ignore. Lantern in hand, Samuel moved toward the chicken coop, heart beating hard as the rain dripped from the broken barn roof. There, curled beside the woodpile like a shadow given shape, was a woman shivering, soaked, barely conscious. Her long dark hair clung to her face, braids unraveled by the storm. She was Apache. Even in her weakened state, she held her chin with a strength that refused to break. Samuel tightened his grip on the lantern, wary yet drawn by something deeper than caution. When she opened her eyes, there was no fear in them, only exhaustion. She stared at him as though she had walked through fire just to collapse here. "If you want me gone," she whispered, voice trembling from the cold, "I will try to walk away." Samuel paused, rain dripping from his hat brim. The last months had hardened him, but compassion still lived in his bones. She wasn't a threat. She was a survivor like him, like his daughters. He lowered his rifle slowly, feeling the truth settle in his chest. "You'll die out here," he said softly. "Come inside." Inside the dimly lit ranch house, the woman sat near the fire as her clothes steamed lightly from the warmth. Samuel's daughters, Ella and June, peered curiously from behind the kitchen table. The stranger kept her gaze lowered, trying not to startle the children. There was a humility about her, the kind that came from a life of running, hiding, surviving. When Samuel asked her name, she spoke quietly. "Yana," nothing more, no explanation, no excuses. And yet, the tired ache in her voice told him she had lived through something terrible, something that had torn her from her people. Ella was the first to approach her, carrying a wooden horse toy with hesitant bravery. She placed it gently in Ayana's lap, then stepped back, watching her reaction. Yana smiled, small, slow, almost unfamiliar, yet enough to make June inch closer too. The fire crackled softly. For the first time in a long while, Samuel watched his girls relax around someone. It startled him. Since their mother's death, they trusted no one new. They cried at night, clung to him during the day, followed him like shadows. But now, in the presence of this silent, broken woman, they seemed to breathe easier. By morning, the storm had lifted. Sunlight stretched across the wet fields, painting everything in muted gold. Samuel expected Ayana to slip away at dawn, returning to whatever life awaited her beyond the hills. But she stood near the door with hesitation written across her face. "Thank you for shelter," she murmured. "I have nowhere to go." Her voice cracked when she said it, as if admitting it stripped her last layer of strength. Samuel saw in her the same loneliness that had haunted his nights. She wasn't dangerous. She was stranded, just like he and his daughters had been in their grief. As the girls finished breakfast, Yana gently helped June tie her shoelace and brushed a tangle from Ella's hair. Her touch was careful, almost reverent, as though she was afraid of doing something wrong. But Samuel saw the way the girls leaned into her without thinking. They needed tenderness. They needed a presence that carried warmth instead of work, reassurance instead of exhaustion. He felt something shift inside him, a realization he wasn't prepared for. Yana had brought a small piece of peace into the house within hours. She had done what he hadn't been able to do in months. He walked outside to clear his thoughts, but the truth followed him. The ranch was dying. The barn roof was split. The cattle were thinning. The fences were collapsing. He couldn't raise children, run the ranch, and fight grief all alone. He needed help, not from a hired stranger, not from a neighbor doing charity. He needed someone who genuinely cared. And his daughters needed a woman who could be gentle where he was rough, patient where he was tired. Someone like the woman, still standing quietly by his door, uncertain of where she belonged. Samuel returned inside, heart pounding with a decision that felt both desperate and painfully honest. Yana lifted her head, confused by the intensity in his gaze. He didn't circle around the truth, didn't soften it with words he didn't mean. He spoke straight, the way frontier men did when everything inside them broke at once. "Yana," he said, voice unsteady, "you need a place to stay, and my girls, they need someone who can give them what I no longer can." She stared at him, stunned by the raw vulnerability in his tone. He swallowed hard, breath shallow. "I need a mother for my girls, and you need shelter." Anna froze as though the room itself had stopped moving. Her lips parted, eyes widening, but no words came out. Samuel lifted a hand nervously. "I'm not asking for anything improper," he said. "I'm not offering you convenience or anything like that." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm offering marriage, protection, a home, a place where no one will hunt you or judge you or treat you like you're less." Yana shook her head in disbelief, tears gathering despite her effort to hide them. "Why me?" she whispered, as if the question burned her. "Because my girls trust you," he answered simply. "Because you're gentle, because you survived things most people wouldn't, because I'd rather offer my daughters a good-hearted stranger than someone the town forces on us out of pity." Yana pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. He wasn't giving her pity. He wasn't giving her charity. He was giving her dignity. "I cannot replace their mother," she whispered. "I won't try," Samuel nodded. "Mary will always be their mother, but they need someone who cares, and I think you do." And in that fragile, trembling moment, the world held its breath around them. Yana had no words, only the trembling rise and fall of her breath as she tried to understand the proposal laid before her. The room felt heavier, quieter. Samuel stood with his hands shaking slightly, not from fear of her, but fear of what she might say. Rejection meant he would go back to facing everything alone. Acceptance meant her life would forever change. Yana wiped a tear with the back of her hand, steadying herself. "If I stay," she whispered, "I will give all I can, not because I owe you, but because your daughters deserve peace." Samuel nodded, relief softening his face, even though she hadn't given a full answer yet. For the rest of that day, they spoke little. Yana helped the girls wash their hair, clean the dishes, sweep the floor. Samuel fixed the broken window latch and patched a few damaged boards near the coop. Nothing felt normal, yet everything felt strangely right. When night fell, the girls begged Yana to sit with them until they fell asleep. She did, soft humming, gentle strokes through their hair, patience Samuel envied. He stood by the bedroom door, watching the scene without letting her notice. In that moment, he saw a truth more powerful than any vow. She belonged there, not as a servant, not as a refugee, as part of the home. The next morning she gave her answer. She stood by the doorway, fingers interlocked nervously. "If you still offer marriage," she said softly, "I will accept, not to replace, not to pretend, but to help you raise them, and to have a place where I may breathe without running." Samuel didn't move for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and solemn, as though sealing a vow with his very heartbeat. "Then stay," he said, "not as a burden, not as charity, as family." Yana bowed her head slightly. "As family," she echoed, "a simple exchange, a simple promise, yet one that would transform everything." But the frontier had a way of testing every fragile hope. Word spread quickly, too quickly. A cowboy marrying an Apache woman was not a story people handled with grace. Some said he was desperate. Some said she bewitched him. Some said the ranch had gone mad. Within days, the whispers turned into open confrontation. One afternoon, while Samuel was repairing the barn roof, 3 men rode up, dust rising behind their horses like anger made visible. They marched across the field with self-righteous fury painted on their faces. Samuel climbed down, jaw tight. He knew exactly why they came. The tallest of the men jabbed a finger toward the house. "We heard you got yourself an Apache woman living under your roof," he spat. "And now you're marrying her?" Samuel crossed his arms. "That's my business," the second man snorted. "Her kind raided my cousin's ranch, stole cattle, nearly burned his barn." Yana stepped out of the house then, stopping on the porch with the girls behind her. Her posture was calm, but Samuel could see the tension in her hands. The men glared at her with venom. Samuel stepped between them immediately. "You'll leave," he said, low and firm. Or what? The third man mocked, stepping forward. You gonna point that rifle at us for savage? Samuel didn't blink. If you force me. The air snapped tight like a pulled bowstring. The men hesitated, not because they feared him, but because they knew he meant every word. Samuel had always been reasonable, always steady, but grief had sharpened him into something they didn't recognize. They spat in the dirt and rode off, but not before the tallest man growled, "You'll regret this. The town won't stand with you." Samuel watched them disappear, then turned to find Ayana trembling slightly. "They'll come back," she whispered. "They always do." Samuel stepped onto the porch, his expression softening. "Let them come. I won't let anyone hurt you or the girls." Little June hugged Ayana's leg as if sensing her fear. Ella looked up at Samuel with wide eyes. "Are those men bad?" she asked. He hesitated. "They're scared," he answered finally, "and scared people do foolish things." But Ayana knew better. Hatred was older than fear. And tribal blood was often enough to make folks violent. Despite the tension, the wedding happened a week later, not in a church, not in front of a crowd, but under the open sky behind the ranch. Yana wore a simple dress Mary once owned, slightly altered to fit her frame. Samuel wore his cleanest shirt, the one Mary had sewn years ago. The girls stood between them, holding dried wildflowers gathered from the nearby hills. A local preacher was the only witness willing to come. His voice was hesitant, unsure, but the vows were spoken clear and true. When Samuel and Ayana exchanged their quiet promises, the girls cheered softly, wrapping their small arms around both. The early days of marriage were awkward, gentle, and unexpectedly warm. Samuel wasn't a man of many words, and Ayana wasn't a woman who demanded them. She understood silence. She had lived in it long enough. She took over the kitchen slowly, asking permission with her eyes before changing anything. She braided the girls' hair every morning and taught them small Apache phrases. She began tending to the horses, humming softly while she worked. Samuel fixed what she couldn't, lifted what she struggled with, protected what she feared. They worked beside each other, step by step, breath by breath, forming a quiet partnership stronger than any spoken vow. One evening, as the sun bled orange along the horizon, Samuel found Ayana sitting alone near the corral. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I miss my people," she whispered. "I miss the songs, the stories, the fire at night." Samuel sat beside her, not touching her, just close enough that she felt less alone. "I can't give you back what you lost," he said softly, "but I can make sure you never lose a home again." Yana turned to him with a fragile smile. "You already have." For the first time since Mary's death, Samuel felt warmth spread through his chest, a warmth that wasn't grief, but something remarkably close to healing. But trouble returned sooner than they expected. One night, while the household slept, the same three men rode back to the ranch, this time armed with more than prejudice. They shouted threats, demanding Ayana be handed over. Samuel grabbed his rifle and stood on the porch, refusing to move. The men fired a warning shot into the air. Samuel fired back, hitting the ground inches from their horses. The message was clear. The standoff stretched into a dangerous silence. Finally, the men realized Samuel wouldn't break. They cursed, spat, and rode off into the dark. Ayana collapsed against him once they were gone, shaking. "I will leave," she cried. "I won't bring danger here." Samuel held her shoulders firmly. "You're not leaving, you're family now. And family stays." After that night, the town slowly backed away from the conflict. They realized Samuel would protect his home at any cost. Rumors faded, anger dimmed, and life at the ranch settled into a peaceful rhythm once more. Seasons changed. The girls grew stronger, happier. They laughed again, full, bright laughter that filled the house the way Mary once did. Samuel began smiling more often, not out of duty, but out of genuine joy. And Ayana, once a wandering soul lost in the storm, found herself building a life she never dreamed possible. She had a husband who respected her, daughters who loved her, and a home that finally felt safe. Years later, people would say that Samuel Hart saved an Apache woman from a storm, but the truth whispered through the fields was gentler, deeper. Ayana didn't just survive that night. She saved a broken family from drowning in their own sorrow. She gave the girls a mother's tenderness, Samuel a partner's strength, and the ranch a new heartbeat. Love did not come quickly. It did not come easily. But when it finally rooted itself between them, it grew with the steady, unshakable power of the frontier itself, quiet, enduring, eternal. And in the end, The widower cowboy's heartbreaking proposal became the beginning of a life neither of them ever expected, yet both desperately needed.